Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I often talk here about qualified immunity. And qualified immunity is the concept that the police or other people in positions of power can't be sued for what they do because they've got qualified immunity from lawsuits. And the qualified immunity concept was not based on a law that was, passed by the legislature or voted into law by voters. It was, in essence, invented by the courts. The courts said, well, this makes sense to us, and we don't think that people should be allowed to, for example, sue police officers, even when they do outrageous things. And a lot of people have said, wait, Steve, that's so wrong. How would we fix this? And I've said, well, the Supreme Court could reverse the idea, but they don't do that very often. They do it occasionally, but not that often. However, I've said that it could be fixed by legislatures passing laws to outlaw it in their states, for instance. Congress could pass a law and outlaw it on the federal level. Bill sent me notes, Steve, check this out. Ohio looks like they're onto something here from WCPO. Jay Shakur wrote this. Proposal to end qualified immunity in Ohio moves forward. It'd be the first ever such ballot measure in the U.S. Organizers could soon begin petitioning across the state for a proposed constitutional amendment that would eliminate legal immunity that protects police, prosecutors, teachers, and many other public servants in Ohio from civil lawsuits. So we've heard stories, and I'm not going to get into all the different examples, but for instance, you hear stories about outrageous arrests, for instance. There was a story about the guy in Michigan who was walking along one day, and some plainclothes cops came up to him and started harassing him, and they didn't identify themselves, and he didn't know they were cops. And the situation escalated very, very quickly until they finally just beat him up. And then they said, oh, by the way, we're police officers. They arrested him, handcuffed him, and hauled him off. And he was injured in that incident. I've met the man, by the way. And at every level he goes to, the courts say you can't sue them. They're police officers. And they seem to think that that's the end of the analysis, i.e., they're police, can't be sued. And so the courts did say there's a very, very narrow exception that you can sue them for. And it's when you can show that there is in that area precedent where a court has said, oh, they can be sued for that. But as noted previously, for them to have created the precedent would require a precedent prior to that, which it often is the case. They go, well, there's no precedent for that. And so the other one that I remember being argued more than once was when the police were accused of stealing things from someone's home, for instance. They're executing a search warrant, or they're looking for somebody, or they're in a house for some reason, and something goes missing. And the homeowner goes, I believe the police stole it. And there have been cases thrown out because of qualified immunity saying, well, unless you can find precedent that says that it is unlawful for a police officer to steal from someone else's home and that it exposes them to liability, qualified immunity will protect them. And so it's obviously something that can be pushed to absurd lengths. So that's the biggest problem I have with it, because I agree on some level that just because you don't like a police officer, you can't sue them. There's got to be a basis for the lawsuit that's not frivolous. So after a hard-fought back and forth, the Ohio Attorney General ruled that the Ohio Coalition to End Qualified Immunity accurately summarized its proposed amendment on petition forms and can begin collecting signatures from voters. So they're going to try to put this on the ballot. And you may know this, you might not, but to get something on the ballot, you've got to gather signatures, and you have ballot language. The actual language will be on the ballot. But you don't have to have all that language spelled out to get signatures to put it on the ballot. So you summarize it. And so the key is that you have to summarize it accurately so people don't sign a petition authorizing something else than what you're proposing. It can get ugly because they often fight it at that level, and they can tie it up for a length of time. And so there are a lot of time issues about when you can raise the signatures in advance of an election and so on. The organization needs a little over 414,000 signatures by the first week of July timeframe to qualify for the fall ballot of 2025. Those who are pushing to end qualified immunity say it has allowed government employees to violate citizens' rights without any consequences. It's almost impossible to sue your government when they violate your constitutional rights, says the executive director of the organization pushing for this. Don't you think that ought to be changed here in Ohio? Right now, there's people in 49 other states who are going, it should be changed here too. A lot of people kind of fall into the same mindset. It's a very American ideal. It's not left, it's not right. This is, by the way, something that people agree on both sides of the aisle. Now, what does happen, every video I put up about qualified immunity, I get at least one person who goes, Steve, you can't just file frivolous lawsuits and get away with it. Right now, there's actually rules against frivolous lawsuits. Doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a cop or not. So if someone files a frivolous lawsuit against you, you go into court and you say, Judge, it's frivolous, toss it. Qualified immunity protects government officials like teachers and police officers from lawsuits if they're accused of violating a person's civil rights while working in their official capacity. Qualified immunity exists for a reason, says the president of the Cincinnati Fraternal Order of Police. It exists for the balance between the accountability between public servants as well as to protect from frivolous lawsuits. And so this guy says, it's a frivolous lawsuit. So ask that guy who got beat up if that lawsuit's frivolous. Ask anybody who hears the story if it's frivolous. And ask somebody whose stuff was stolen from their house and the only people in the house besides them were the cops. Is that frivolous? And so I understand that, frivolous lawsuits shouldn't be allowed to just languish and go through the courts and cause somebody a hassle. But you don't say, because I might see a frivolous lawsuit or two, you can never sue me. The president of the Cincinnati Fraternal Order of Police said the ballot measure could do damage to law enforcement. He cites policies already on the books to discipline officers. In its draft form right now, the amendment would lift this protection. However, it would specify the financial damages would be on the government agency, not the government employee. So if somebody were to sue a police officer after this law gets passed, if it gets passed, you win your lawsuit, the government still pays. But at least the person who got wronged would get paid. He says, if you violate somebody's constitutional rights or you violate a law in such a way that a reasonable person in that field would know that it's wrong, you already don't get qualified immunity. So he says these things are already in place. To just blanket get rid of qualified immunity is going to damage public servants. People are going to leave. If it passes, Ohio would be the first state in the country to end qualified immunity by the people's vote. So that's interesting. And I've said this before, and it bears repeating, as they say. And that is that occasionally courts do things and make rulings that many people disagree with. And I can think of a few off the top of my head, and so can you. So I don't need to throw out examples. And so the court does something like creates qualified immunity out of whole cloth. And people go, this is crazy. That's wrong. That shouldn't exist. What's that doing there? And I've had people say, but Steve, what can we as people do about this? What can we do? And I've said, you can complain to your legislator or do things to change the law. And one thing you do to change the law is to put it on a ballot and have people vote on it. And so all it's going to take, and this is going to be a lot of work, but it's going to take signatures of people in Ohio who say, yes, I back this. 414,000 signatures, because that's based on a percentage of the voting population, I believe. And it gets put on the ballot. And then if it wins in the fall election, it becomes the law in Ohio. Boom. So people in other states could do the exact same thing. And that's what I'm hopeful about. Because the only people who are pushing back against this, as far as I can tell, are the people who are the police fraternal organizations. You don't often hear about lawsuits being filed and tossed against teachers and other entities as often as you hear about it from the police. I know it happens. But the egregious examples we hear about are with the police. And so that's going to be the organization that's against this. But meanwhile, pretty much anybody else can think and go, wait, qualified immunity doesn't make any sense. So what the guy's getting at with the Fraternal Order of Police, okay, he's saying we have a legitimate reason to be protected against frivolous lawsuits. Yes, you do. By the way, so does everybody. I've been sued with a frivolous lawsuit before, as some of you know. But that doesn't mean that you say, okay, because you get sued with frivolous lawsuits, no one can sue you ever. Or no one can sue you except for this tiny little exception it's almost impossible to ever meet. That's not the correct answer there. That's not. So if they want to, they can possibly tailor these things differently. But right now, where the pendulum has swung way too far in one direction, they're going to swing it back the other direction. Whether it's way too far or not, who knows? But I'd rather see it where the lawsuits can be filed and the courts can deal with them, rather than the lawsuit gets filed and the court goes, gee, I understand you've got an interesting case and you got horrendous damages, but you can't sue them. You can't. And so that to me is a problem that could be fixed by this amendment. So I think Ohio is doing the right thing here, and it's going to be something that you can sign the petition for if you're a registered voter in Ohio, and it could be on the ballot in the fall. And so I will follow this closely, but I'm hoping that people in other states will see it too, because once in a while that happens where people get way upset by something, very, very upset about something, and somebody goes, hey, I got a solution, and they draft the language, they get the signatures, put it on the ballot. People in other states go, wait a second. We can just simply model what we do based on what they did because it worked. So draft some ballot proposals, get some signatures, put it on the ballot, and see what happens. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall if this gets on the ballot as to who lines up against it and who lines up for it. Because I suspect you're going to get some fairly large organizations lining up against this. But some of the cases we talked about on this channel have been so egregious that I think that the average person, if asked and said, this is a binary proposition, you either allow all the lawsuits or none of the lawsuits. Which is better for society? And most people would say, well, you got to allow them all because of the crazy stuff that happens out there where clearly there should be a remedy. But what about the frivolous lawsuits? You know something? Courts can deal with frivolous lawsuits in any setting. So there's already a rule in the books about that. And which, again, is worse? Because if you say, no, we're not going to allow any lawsuits, I'm giving it as a hypothetical. You're not going to allow any lawsuits. Well, then you have abuses. You have abuses. And by the way, understand that police know they've got the immunity. If you don't think that police know they've got qualified immunity when they're doing wrong things, you might want to go back out and study some more human behavior. Just in real life, not classes or anything. Just go out and study it and ask yourself, when people find out they've got carte blanche to do something, do they do it? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. So, Bill, thanks for sending that from WCPO out of Ohio. Proposal to end qualified immunity in Ohio moves forward. Jay Shakur wrote it. We'll watch and see what happens. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Never memorize something you can look up.